Is the world de-dollarizing and on the hunt for a new trade system? Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new week of insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, Alex is back to dig into the US dollar, which is a topic I know we both are very interested in. So how are you going today, Alex?
I'm going very well. It is very hot in Sydney again today, so enjoying that.
Yeah, it's a bit overcast here, so it's been a bit cooler. So we, might be switching the weather around a bit because I'm up in Brisbane. So
Well, it'd be nice. Sydney's due some non-wet weather.
yes. So very interesting topic today in the news that you were writing about. Well, I find it very interesting anyway. I think it's a topic that is in the back of our minds, but people don't realize how significant it could be if it continues to unfold as it has been. So can you give us a little bit of an overview about what you were talking about in the news today, the US dollar and this idea of people weaponizing the dollar?
Yeah, so we've seen the US dollar probably in the last 2 months really weaken, and that's really helped metals along a lot. So we've seen gold go from 1,600 to now 1920 in US dollars today. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about a loss of faith in the US dollar. Particularly, this has come out of, I guess, in 2022 with the Ukraine war, what's been termed as US dollar weaponization, which is where the US uses their trade system and the US dollar international trade system to sanction and punish countries such as Russia. So this has been going on since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We all know the cold shoulder Cuba got after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we all know, all the old cars they're driving around in and what actually happened to Cuba. But interestingly, it's actually happened to 24 countries, including Cuba.
Wow.
But Russia's the big one that, you've got to question what's going on if a country the size of Russia is being punished the way it is. You've got these, countries that have a different political system like China and India, where they start to fear the fact that they too could end up like this if they put a foot wrong.
And that's something that's always struck me with this discussion. When that happened last year and we started to see some real use of the US dollar through those sanction mechanisms, that it seemed to me like a risk that they sort of going, well, or maybe a little bit of hubris, or just this idea that you can do that without any consequence, because there's a lot of people living in the rest of these countries that are not going to take that very well. And you go, well, can you only do that once and then it doesn't work again? You use that weaponization of the dollar, and then they go, well, we won't fall for that. Fool us once, we won't fall for that again. So I'm sort of curious to know, do you have some examples of what it actually looks like when countries, not companies, when countries, but also companies, actually, it was a slip of the tongue, but it's the same both ways. When people decide to not use the US dollar, what does that actually look like?
Well, I guess a term I think that will be one of the big terms for 2023 will be de-dollarization. So what is de-dollarization? It is just not using US currency for trade. So currently, US currency is used about 40% of trade internationally, and that's been dropping significantly since about 2013. So some of those charts that were in the Ainslie News today, if you look at them, you'll see ebbs and flows of US dollar trade, and it's been dropping. But what they're saying about this weaponization, even though it's been going on for decades, Russia may be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And some of the examples that, we've spoken about in the last few years last year is the petro yuan. So we know that now Russia and China are trading the petro yuan. They're trying to onboard Saudi Arabia, which is very interesting. But actually, the countries that are looking at this the most, and one big example is India. So India right now has rupee-ruble transactions going on with Russia. So that was, I think it started being spoken about in about July last year. Yep. But December 2022 was their first transaction. Now, they're not only talking about these transactions with Russia, they're talking about it with United Arab Emirates, Japan. Southeast Asian countries, there's a lot of countries that they're trying to onboard to trade in the rupee. And we obviously know China has a lot of countries that they're trying to trade with the yuan now, with the renminbi, sorry. So there's a real move, particularly in the BRICs, that they're trying to get away from the US dollar.
And the BRICS one, we've talked about that before. They're a group that really are sort of escalating this, aren't they? Because I've seen even to the level of advertisements on like CNBC and places like that, where they're really talking about the strength of that bloc and what they're trying to do to onboard more countries into that bloc.
Yeah, so the strength of that bloc is that it represents 41% of the world population and only 24% of GDP, but it is growing. And they as a bloc are actively talking about de-dollarization. How do we get away from this? So, you know, if they're looking for this, what is going to happen? You know, the US dollar is not going to roll over, I don't think, and let this happen.
No, and that's probably my next question. So what do you think the US actually does there? Because often people say that line that you just said then, well, the US is not going to roll over and let that happen. But sometimes I question that and go, well, the company example, individual companies, individual countries, when they make these decisions, they're often just making them on practical reasons. It's not a geopolitical decision to decide that, well, there's a market over here. They want to be paid in this currency. Okay, we can facilitate that. We'll do it. But the US will obviously be aware that this is an issue that can really undermine their power quite significantly. So how do they respond, do you think?
Well, I'll give you an example of something that I was reading about today, which is actually Egypt, who wants to join the BRICS, went to the last BRICS thing and said, we're joining. That was about a month ago. A week or so later, the IMF stepped in and said, Egypt, here's $3 billion, but we need you to start allowing your private companies to trade again in USD because they put a ban on direct payments.
So that's quite a direct move, isn't it, from them?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends. Is the IMF US's puppet? Possibly, maybe not. But, you know, it is a direct, please start using the US dollar again reaction to them saying they don't want to. Then 2 weeks ago, America has promised Boeing a new contract for 12 Chinook helicopters to be given to Egypt. So they're gifting them some military equipment, which is a tactic that they've used before. But interestingly, 5 days ago, despite all of the pressure, I guess, that Egypt is actually getting to use the US dollar, they have turned around and said, no, there'll be no government contracts with any US dollar component that they'll be awarding right now. So they're really kicking back against the US dollar. And America and I guess the IMF are really trying to support the US dollar. So there seems to be a lot of movement around supporting this.
And I think that example highlights, like, that's very recent and quite fast, really, like this sort of diplomacy around this and how it's unfolding. So it's not a future issue. It's something that's very active right at this moment.
That's right. And clearly they see BRICS as a threat, and clearly they see countries joining BRICS that are outside of that system right now as, you know, something that will help with the de-dollarization. So they're defending it.
It's very interesting. So I just want to turn the topic slightly. Obviously, we've got a lot of people who'll be watching this who are interested on the impact of movements in the US dollar on precious metals. And I think this is an area that really can have quite a significant impact. Obviously, the price itself is determined in the currency you're operating in. So when we look at gold in Australian dollars, it can look slightly different to what's happening to gold in US dollars, but it's generally the same sort of trend. It's generally the same direction. But are there some real sort of fundamental differences about the impact of de-dollarization on the potential for the gold price?
Well, it's definitely, gold is definitely gaining traction again with central banks. So we've obviously seen gold purchases, huge gold purchases by central banks, but we've also seen central banks actually de-dollarizing and dropping their reserves of USD. So, you know, they're swapping gold, and in Russia's case, they're buying renminbi, so they're buying the yuan to allow for that trade. And just for one example, July 2022, Zimbabwe, because of their inflationary issues and because of the US dollar, they introduced a gold coin to settle a lot of international transactions. So they're literally trying to use gold to help support their currency, I guess, to stop the inflationary pressures that are happening because of the US dollar. But the more interesting one is probably the Petro yuan. They are trying to entice getting Saudi Arabia on board, because if they can do that, I think it's something like they'll have about 40% of the oil trade between Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia. I might have got that wrong, but it's a huge portion of oil will be traded in Petro yuan if they can get them on board. So China is actually now proposing to back it with gold, that particular trading vehicle. So if they do that, you're looking at about $1 trillion in transactions a month that'll have some sort of gold backing. So that's got to be highly supportive of gold right now.
You would definitely think so. That's these are not small numbers, and if it gets that sort of traction on that global stage, we could see quite substantial moves in the price of gold, you would imagine, as everyone all of a sudden realizes there's a trade going on there, because it's been a bit sleepy up until recently, hasn't it?
It sure has been. Well, I mean, in US dollar terms, though, it's up 20% in the last 2 months. In Aussie dollar terms, it's
recently, absolutely,
3 or 4%.
Yeah, but prior to that, it was. I mean, it's been generally moving up, but not sort of an aggressive move, but some sort of traction there you could see would probably really inflate it.
Definitely, this talk of de-dollarization is driving gold.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, Alex, for joining us today. I always find it interesting to hear your perspective on US dollar dominance, because currencies impact everything. It's always part of the macroeconomic landscape. So I definitely love this discussion, and I'm sure we'll be back at it again.
I look forward to it again.
Thanks also to everyone for watching, and for those who have made comments and asked us questions. We always love to hear from you, so reach out on the socials. I'll be back on Wednesday and Thursday this week with the rest of the Insights team, so I look forward to our next conversations then.